This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hey guys, I'm here with a video showing you how I made my Bakugou grenade gauntlets. If you want the patterns for this, it's available on my store Envy, and I have an Etsy if you prefer shopping there instead. So what I'm doing in this clip is tracing the pattern pieces for the base of the gauntlets, or the main body of the gauntlets, onto 6mm EVA foam. Once that's traced out, like all of the pieces are traced out, I go ahead and start cutting all of those pieces out. I should also note that I have labeled the pieces so I know which part is top, which part is bottom, and which piece connects to which other piece. Once all those pieces are cut out, I go ahead and take a Dremel to it to smooth out the edges on all of the pieces. This took quite a while, and I'm not going to show a whole lot of footage from that because it's pretty boring to watch. And you should get that point. Just run your Dremel over the edges so that everything is smooth, because cutting it out kind of leaves some jaggedy edges sometimes. Once all of the edges have been dremeled, I go ahead and start applying contact cement to all of the edges. Again, this takes quite a while, especially because I decided to do 2 coats of contact cement, since there is going to be a lot of tension between the pieces because it's curving in a way it doesn't necessarily want to curve. To help relieve this tension a little bit later, after I have glued everything together, I hit it with a heat gun and kind of just hold it in place so that it will keep that shape a bit more naturally and not pull at the seams as much as it would otherwise. Once the contact cement has sat for the recommended amount of time, I start sticking the edges together, and I start with the center 2 pieces and then add on from there, going from one side to the other until we have the back pieces attached but not fully together. If you didn't notice, the way it wanted to curve was so that the part that's supposed to be on the outside was on the inside, so I had to go through and flip that basically inside out so that all the smooth edges were the edges that were curving outward or inward, so that the rough textured part was facing inward. And that's a little tricky to do because it added, again, more tension to the seams, but once I did that, I could glue it shut on the back. What I'm doing here is tracing the patterns that I made for the end caps, is what I'm going to call them, the pieces that go on the front and back of the gauntlet, out onto 6mm EVA foam, and then cutting that out. And then I'm hitting it with a Dremel, but only on the inside. But first, because the ones that go on the back of the grenade launcher, or the smaller end of the grenade gauntlets. What am I saying? I wanted those to be thicker, so I stacked 2 pieces of 6mm EVA foam on each other, and then dremeled it. I almost forgot about that part, but yeah, so this is now 12mm thick for the back pieces, but the front pieces are still only 6mm thick. And then I go ahead and dremel the edges of the gauntlet in order to prep them to be attached to the end cap pieces. And I'm dremeling down this textured part where I'm going to be applying contact cement, because the contact cement sticks better to the non-textured surface. Once the 2 back end caps are glued on, I go ahead and cut off the excess bits with a pair of scissors, because some of it overhangs the gauntlet a bit too much, or overhangs the lower piece a bit too much. And then I hit it with a Dremel to smooth it out, as well as round it out better, because the shape warped a little bit when I had taken the scissors to it, because, you know, not the best at cutting it perfectly how I need it to be. So the Dremel helps that. And then the end caps are attached on the back piece, so now I just have to go through and do the same thing but with the top pieces, which works a little bit differently. So here again, I'm removing the texture where the glue is going to be as much as possible, sanding out that middle section and making sure my hand can fit through. And then I'm applying contact cement around the edges, but first I'm checking to make sure that this is going to fit correctly in the gauntlet, because it has to fit kind of in it. And if it doesn't, then I'm hitting it with a Dremel again, just to remove a little bit at a time until it fits without pushing it out too much or getting too small to fit. Here's the part where I start applying contact cement, and again I do about 2 layers on both the pieces. Once the front end caps are in place, I go ahead and take a Dremel to the edges and smooth out that seam, and then continue to smooth out the remaining edges that we haven't Dremeled yet, which is that top half right there. And also cut off the corners just a little bit because it didn't curve quite the way I wanted it to, so I had to just slightly adjust that afterwards by just eyeballing it to make sure it looked correct. After this, I had to pattern the squares for the gauntlet, so I wrapped half of the gauntlet in duct tape, and divided it into 4 sections, because from what I could tell there was 4 rows? No, columns. 4 columns and 4 rows as well, at least on the front, and then 2 rows on the back. So I tried to divide that up as evenly as I could, as well as add the edging that is along the top and the bottom pieces, and then drew out rough shapes for the square. Cut that piece out, and then I re-put down duct tape again in that same spot to try it out, to like test out the squares that I had just cut out and see if they fit in all the places or if I had to make them slightly different. And yeah, it was just a lot of trial and error until I got something that worked, and this is how I created the pattern though. Again, you can skip all this if you want, because I have the patterns up on my store. So once I did figure out what I was doing with the patterns, I cut that out and then transferred it onto EVA foam. The top pieces were cut out in 2mm EVA foam. The top pieces, I meant like the top and bottom pieces. The edging is 2mm EVA foam, and then the actual squares themselves are cut out in 6mm EVA foam. Once I have those edges cut out, I go ahead and Dremel, well, the edges, to make sure everything is smooth before putting contact cement on the sides that's going to adhere to the base, as well as the base in the spots that the edges are going to go. And by the way, I have taken a Sharpie to the base of the gauntlets and traced out all of the spots, or at least the columns and the edging, so that I knew exactly where to stick everything once it came time to glue. Can't see here, but you will see in a clip or two from now. So I start by gluing on these bottom edge pieces first. When I get to the last bit, I cut off any excess that comes just from me tugging and stretching the foam a bit more than I intended, and pressing that down to close up that seam. And I also Dremel again along the bottom edge to smooth out that seam and smooth everything out in general, and I Dremel along the seams as well for the same reason. And then I move on to the top section and glue, or the top edging, and glue that down, and do the exact same thing where I Dremel along the edges to smooth everything out, cut off any excess as well so that it's not overlapping, and then Dremel down the seams to try to smooth them out and keep them as unnoticeable or hidden as possible. Now I start working on the squares, and I'm just dremeling all of the edges to make it nice and smooth and clean looking on all of the squares, and this took a long time because there's a lot of pieces. And again, I should note that I have labeled all the squares, like where they go and what's the top and bottom side of them as well. Once everything's dremeled, I go ahead and apply contact cement, and I'm doing 2 layers of contact cement on all of these pieces as well as on the base of the gauntlet, but I'm doing them in small sections at a time. So to start off, I'm only applying the 4 back pieces. This is what I'm talking about when I say that I have traced out the columns that they get divided into, and besides that, I'm just eyeballing how far apart I want the rows to sit. But I do have a line on this one from when I was trying to pattern it out. The other one does not have those lines though, so I wasn't following those lines exactly. I was more just eyeballing it to see where it would line up and making sure that there was enough room for the other pieces and enough of a gap in between each of them that looked even enough. It's not super perfect and all like calculated or anything like that, but I thought it turned out pretty well. Anyways, once I've glued the 4 center back pieces into place, I move on to the 2 side back pieces and glue those down on either side, and then move on to the side front pieces, but only glue on the bottom 2 at first, and then the top 2, and then I glue on the bottom 2 center pieces on, again, both sides, and then move on to the top 2 center pieces, and then I have all of the pieces glued on. And you don't have to work in this order exactly. This is just the order that I worked in so that I could make sure that the bottom pieces were spaced out enough, and then I could align the front pieces to those because the front bottom pieces needed to be in line with the back bottom pieces. And then I would know that I didn't like glue them down too far or glue them up too high if I had started with like the top half that doesn't go all the way around, obviously. Basically what I'm trying to say is that this is the order that made sense for me to glue them in so that I could have them all aligned as best as possible and as evenly as possible without having to like trace every single piece out and do like measurements and stuff like that, because I like to eyeball things. Now I'm working on the triggers. That's what I'm going to call this part of the grenade, the triggers. So I'm working on the triggers, and I'm cutting out 4 pieces because I'm layering them together, and this is 6mm EVA foam, so that when I layer it together it will be 4mm. And then I'm cutting out the top layer, is what I'm calling these pieces, top layer, which is like this little detailed layer that sits on top of the front of the trigger just to give it more depth, or I really don't know, but this is what the reference photo showed, so this is what I'm doing. And I applied contact cement to all of those pieces, glue them together so that now I have 2 triggers instead of 4 trigger pieces, and then attach the top layers so that there's, again, only 2 pieces almost full. And then I attach these little bolt pieces. I don't know what else to call these. They're bolt pieces to me, and these are 6mm EVA foam as well. And these pieces I have already dremeled out for the most part because I won't be able to hit that top rounded part with the Dremel later. And I took a small Dremel head to basically drill those holes out of the center that you can see they have little holes in them. I used the Dremel to do that. Once all those pieces are glued into place, I take a Dremel to smooth out all of the edges and try to clean up those seam lines or hide those seam lines as much as possible, although it's a bit more tricky on the foam that I'm using because one side is textured, so it does leave a bit of gaps that I will cover up and fill in later. You'll see that in a different video though, because the painting and priming is not in this video. So that top layer, or that extra layer that it has, is also along this front section, and I didn't realize that until now, so I just took a scrap piece of 2mm EVA foam, applied contact cement to both that area and this area, and glued that on, cut off the excess, and then dremeled off the excess that was on the main part, or anywhere I couldn't get the scissors. I dremeled it out anyways in general, all over the place, just to make sure everything was smooth. And now I'm attaching it to the gauntlets, so I'm applying 2 layers of contact cement to both those pieces and the center of the gauntlet. I don't have it super marked out where I want it to go. For this, I just eyeballed it, and it turned out fine and was in the right spot. I take a small Dremel head and basically drill a hole in the front of these triggers as well, because he does have a small hole at the front of those when I looked at a reference photo, and that finished up the base of the build for the gauntlet. If you would like to see me distress this and paint it and, finish it off, that will be in the next video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it helpful. Thanks for watching, and have a lovely day. Bye!